A Navy SEAL came home for his father's funeral, but found the house already seized by the bank. His stepmother said the debt was not her problem anymore, and left him to carry the shame alone. That night, he slept in his truck with only his German Shepherd beside him, believing his father had died a failure.
What is
But
that?
inside the old workshop, the dog found something hidden beneath a desk. Something his father never had the chance to explain.
They know
A buried
about Colt.
notebook, a secret recording,
The operation
and
is
a name
compromised.
circled
I
again
repeat,
and
do
again,
not
pointing to a
engage.
betrayal no one saw coming. And when the truth finally rose from the dust, the Navy SEAL had to choose: sell the last piece of his father's life, or fight to restore his honor. Where are you watching from? Like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 followers so we can keep writing stories that matter. Now, let's begin. The call came 2 days too late. Dorian Hale heard it while standing outside a roadside gas station in northern Pennsylvania, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm, the other resting on the roof of his old pickup truck. Snow had begun to fall in thin, restless lines, not enough to cover the road, just enough to make the world look unfinished. His father was dead. The voice on the phone belonged to a woman from the county office. She spoke carefully, with the practiced softness of someone who had delivered bad news, often enough to know that softness did not make it hurt less. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry. Your father passed away 2 days ago. The burial has already taken place." For a moment, Dorian said nothing. He was 35 years old, tall at about 6 feet, lean and hardened by years of Navy SEAL training without the vanity of bulk. His face was clean-shaven, almost severe in its discipline, with a square jaw, defined cheekbones, and gray-blue eyes that looked too long at things, as if measuring danger even in silence. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, as though civilian life had touched him but never fully claimed him. Cold northern wind had roughened his fair skin, leaving it weathered around the eyes and mouth. He wore the same clothes he had worn for 3 days of driving, an old military gray tactical combat shirt, softened by years of use, frayed at the cuffs and shoulders, with a slightly vivid dark red thermal shirt underneath. His earth-brown and moss-green combat pants were worn at the knees, the cargo pockets sagging from habit more than weight. Old military work boots carried salt and road dust. A battered military watch sat on his wrist like a relic from another life. Beside the truck, Rook lifted his head. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, working line, lean and strong, with a cream-gray-black sable coat and amber eyes that held a quiet, uncanny intelligence. His black harness, edged in deep red trim, made him look less like a pet than a partner. He was not restless, not noisy. Rook rarely wasted movement. When he watched something, it mattered. Now he watched Dorian. Dorian ended the call without asking the woman to repeat herself. He stood there while traffic hissed past on the wet road. His father had died, been buried, and become paperwork before his son had even arrived. It should have hurt more. That was the first thought that made him ashamed. The second was worse. Maybe this was how it was always going to end. His father, Daniel Hale, had once owned a machine shop in a northern mill town where people measured men by whether they kept their word, paid their men, and stood upright when hard seasons came. Daniel had failed at all three. At least that was the story Dorian had carried for years. The business collapsed. The family house went under. His mother left early in his life. Then his stepmother came. Then everything cracked again. Debt had eaten the name Hale down to bone. And Dorian, at 17, had watched his father shrink inside silence. That silence had been the thing he hated most. A weak man's silence, he had once thought. A coward's silence. He opened the truck door. Rook jumped in without command, settling into the passenger seat with his ears still alert. Dorian drove north through a sky the color of dull steel. By late afternoon, he reached the town. It was smaller than he remembered, or maybe memory had been kinder than reality. The same narrow streets ran between brick storefronts and old maples stripped bare by winter. The hardware store sign still hung crooked. The diner still glowed at the corner. The church steeple still rose pale against the clouds. But the Hale house was not waiting for him. It stood at the end of a street lined with sleeping yards and half-frozen gutters, a two-story house with white siding gone gray, and a porch that sagged slightly at one corner. Yellow notices were taped across the front door. The windows were dark. A chain looped through the handles. Bank property. Dorian sat in the truck with the engine idling. There were no curtains in the windows, no porch light, no old tools leaning near the steps, no smell of machine oil and coffee drifting out when the door opened, no father standing there, ashamed and stubborn, unable to explain himself. Rook gave a low sound from his chest. Not a growl. Something quieter. Dorian got out. The cold went through his shirt quickly. He walked up the cracked path and stood before the locked door. The notice had already begun to curl at the edges from damp air. His gloved fingers touched the paper. Foreclosure proceedings. Final notice. Removal of remaining property pending. The words were clean and official. They made ruin sound administrative. Dorian felt nothing at first. Then anger came, not hot, but flat and metallic. Even dead, his father had left him standing outside a locked door. He turned away before the old memories could rise too clearly. The first place he went was Sarah Hale's rented townhouse on the east side of town. Sarah had been his stepmother for nearly 12 years. She was 42 now, though she had the careful, polished look of a woman who refused to let hardship leave fingerprints. She was medium height, slim, with pale skin, straight chestnut brown hair cut just below the shoulders, and sharp green eyes that always seemed to decide what a person was worth before they finished speaking. She wore a long beige wool coat over dark clothes, simple gold earrings, and black leather gloves. Everything about her was controlled, neat, and cold enough to pass for dignity. She opened the door only halfway. Dorian. No surprise, no grief. Just his name, like an inconvenience. Sarah. Rook stood at Dorian's left side, silent. His amber eyes moved past Sarah into the house. Sarah noticed and tightened her hand around the door. I heard you were coming. That makes one of us, Dorian said, her mouth pressed into a thin line. I'm sorry about Daniel. There it was. Daniel. Not your father? Not my husband? Not even he? Dorian studied her face. She looked tired, but not broken. There was no redness around her eyes, no disorder in her hair, no sign that grief had entered the house behind her. When did you divorce him? He asked. Sarah looked away for half a second. 8 months ago. The answer landed quietly, but it changed the shape of the air. Dorian had expected distance. He had not expected legal erasure. So you knew the house was gone? I knew enough, she said. Daniel made his choices. You were married to him. I was married to him until I understood he was going to drag me under with him. Rook's ears shifted. Dorian heard it, that small motion of attention. He had learned long ago that Rook often noticed the truth before people did not the facts, but the tremor beneath them. Sarah folded her arms. I don't have anything of his. I don't have documents. I don't have keys. I don't have answers. Whatever mess he left, it isn't mine anymore. The words should have ended the conversation. But Dorian remained still. Behind Sarah, On a narrow table near the hallway sat a small silver-framed photograph turned face down. He did not ask about it. Sarah followed his gaze and stepped subtly, blocking the opening. A small movement. A careful one. Something in Dorian's chest tightened, not suspicion yet, only the faint pressure of a door somewhere inside him refusing to close. Rook gave another low breath. Sarah's eyes dropped to the dog. "You always did bring war home with you," she said. Dorian looked back at her. "No," he said quietly. "He came home with me." For the first time, Sarah seemed uncertain, not afraid, just unsettled, as if the dog had made the doorway smaller. Then her face hardened again. "You should sell whatever is left," she said. "If there is anything left. Daniel held on to dead things too long." Dorian did not answer. He walked away with Rook beside him. Behind them, the door closed softly. Not slammed. Softly was worse. That night, Dorian slept in the truck. Not much sleeping happened. He parked behind the old municipal building, where the wind was partially blocked by a line of pines. The town lights glowed weakly through the windshield. Snow gathered along the edges of the glass and melted where the heater briefly touched it, then froze again when he shut the engine off to save fuel. Rook curled in the passenger seat, but he did not fully sleep. His head remained lifted, ears angled toward sounds beyond the truck. Dorian leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He remembered being 17 and hearing his father and Sarah argue behind a closed kitchen door. He remembered numbers spoken like curses. Loan, contract, penalty, payroll. He remembered his father coming out afterward with a face gray from exhaustion, trying to say something to him. Dorian had not let him. He had left for enlistment soon after, carrying anger like armor. In the teams, anger had been useful. It sharpened him. It made him hard enough to survive water, cold, hunger, command, loss. It turned him into a man who could enter chaos and know what to do. But now, sitting in a frozen truck in the town where he had once been a son, he found that anger had one weakness. It did not answer questions. Why had some people stayed loyal to a man who supposedly destroyed them? Why had Sarah looked less like a widow and more like someone guarding a locked drawer? Why had Rook kept watching the town as if the dead were not finished speaking? Dorian closed his eyes. For years, he had believed his father's life was a cautionary tale. A weak man, a failed business, a family ruined by pride and poor judgment. But in the dark, with Rook breathing beside him and snow tapping lightly against the windshield, that old belief shifted. Not much, just enough to become uncomfortable. A man could live beside a truth for years and mistake it for hatred. A son could do the same with a father. Near midnight, Rook suddenly rose, his paws pressed against the seat, his head turned sharply toward the far side of town. Dorian opened his eyes. "What is it?" Rook did not bark. He stared through the fogged glass, body still, tail low, ears forward. Dorian wiped the windshield with his sleeve. Beyond the municipal lot, past the roofs and bare trees, he could just make out the dark line of the industrial road. At the end of it stood the old Hale workshop, a place he had not yet entered, a place that, according to every paper and every rumor, should have been dead. But in the distance, through the snow and the dark, Dorian saw one thin line of yellow light burning. Someone was still there. Rook kept staring. Dorian did not move for a long time. Then he whispered, almost angrily, almost afraid, "What did you leave behind, old man?" The dog's breath fogged the glass. The light at the workshop did not go out. And for the first time since the call came, Dorian felt something stronger than grief or anger. He felt the pull of an unfinished thing. Dorian did not sleep again after he saw the thin yellow light at the far end of the industrial road. Morning came slowly, gray and reluctant, spreading over the town like cold ash. Frost clung to the inside edges of the truck windows. His shoulders ached from sleeping upright. His neck felt like someone had tightened wire beneath the skin. Rook was already awake. The German shepherd sat in the passenger seat, still as a carved sentinel, amber eyes fixed toward the old industrial road. His cream-gray-black coat caught the weak morning light in uneven bands, and the black harness with its dark red trim lay snug against his lean body. He did not whine. He did not paw at the door. That was what made Dorian uneasy. Rook only waited like that when he believed the next move mattered. Dorian rubbed both hands over his face, feeling the rasp of stubble that had not yet become a beard. He hated the heaviness in his chest, hated the way the town seemed to recognize him without welcoming him. In war, a man could read terrain. Corners, rooftops, open ground, windows, exits. But this place had a different kind of threat. It hid inside memories, inside debt notices, inside old names people stopped saying aloud. He started the truck. The Hale workshop stood at the end of a narrow road bordered by frozen weeds and rusted chain-link fencing. The building was long and low, made of weathered brick and sheet metal patched in places where time had tried to peel it apart. A faded sign still hung over the main doors. Hale Precision Works. The letters were cracked, but not gone. Dorian parked outside and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He had expected silence. Instead, he heard machinery. Not loud, not strong, but alive. A slow, rhythmic thudding came from inside, followed by the thin metallic scrape of something being adjusted by hand. It was not the sound of a dead business. It was the sound of old bones still trying to stand. Rook jumped down first. Dorian followed. Inside, the air smelled of machine oil, iron dust, old wood, and winter trapped in concrete. Overhead lights flickered weakly. Several machines stood covered with canvas, but 3 were running. Their belts moved slowly, their metal arms trembling with age. There were men inside. Old men. Not many 4, maybe 5. One had white hair combed flat against his skull, and a back bent from decades of leaning over parts too small for impatient hands. Another was round-shouldered and thin, with a gray mustache stained yellow at the edges from years of cheap cigarettes. A third sat near a workbench, sorting bolts with thick fingers that shook slightly but never dropped one. They looked up when Dorian entered. No one smiled. No one asked if he was all right. That almost made him respect them. At the largest machine stood a man who seemed to belong more fully to the building than the walls did. He was around 65, broad through the chest despite age, with heavy forearms marked by small scars and old burns. His face was square and weather-beaten, the skin roughened by years of heat, oil, and northern wind. A gray beard shadow covered his jaw, not styled, just what a man forgot to shave when work mattered more. His hair, once black, had gone mostly silver and was tucked beneath a dark wool cap. He wore a faded brown flannel shirt, an oil-stained canvas vest, dark work pants, and heavy boots so worn they seemed molded to his feet. His eyes were the kind that did not hurry. They took Dorian in from boots to shoulders to face. Then they moved to Rook. The man gave the dog a small nod, as if greeting another worker. "You Daniel's boy," he said. It was not a question. Dorian stood straighter. "Dorian Hale. I know who you are." The old man wiped his hands on a rag. "Name's Warren Pike." His voice was rough, low and steady, not unfriendly, not warm either. Warren Pike seemed like a man who did not waste kindness on performance. Whatever mercy he had, he stored it in deeds. You running this place? Dorian asked. Warren looked around at the tired machines and the tired men, keeping it from forgetting itself. One of the old workers let out a dry chuckle. The sound vanished quickly. Dorian walked deeper into the shop. Rook stayed close but began to sniff along the base of the workbenches, slow and deliberate. I came to look at it, Dorian said, before deciding what to do. Warren's expression did not change. Sell or keep? Dorian did not answer. The old man understood anyway. Most would sell. You saying I shouldn't? I'm saying most would. There was no judgment in it. That made the sentence heavier. Dorian looked at the men again. Why are you still here? The worker with the cigarette-stained mustache lowered his eyes first. Warren answered for all of them. Because your father gave us work when nobody else would. Dorian felt the words land somewhere he did not want them. Warren continued. Tom over there lost his pension when the mill changed hands. Eddie can't stand long anymore, but he can still read a caliper better than most men read scripture. Lewis had a stroke 5 years back. Your father put a stool by his bench and told him precision didn't need young legs. Dorian looked at them again. Not charity. That was what struck him. They were not standing around waiting for pity. Their movements were slow, but not useless. Their eyes carried the embarrassment of men who had already lost too much and hated needing anything. Yet their hands still knew things. Old, exact things. The kind a modern factory would call inefficient, until the day a machine failed, and no one young knew why. My father was proud of you, Warren said. Dorian looked at him sharply. Warren held his gaze. He did not say it like a soft man, but he said it. A small bitterness rose in Dorian. He had a strange way of showing it. Warren's jaw tightened. For one moment, grief crossed his face. Not loud, not theatrical, just a shadow passing over stone. Daniel Hale had a strange way of carrying everything. Dorian almost asked what that meant. He did not. Warren turned toward a small side office with clouded glass windows. His things are still in there. The office smelled different from the shop. Less oil, more paper, dust, cold coffee, and old stress. A metal desk sat beneath shelves crowded with binders. A cracked leather chair faced a computer so old the monitor looked like a relic. On one wall hung a calendar from 2 years ago, still open to March. Dorian wondered if his father had stopped changing it, or simply stopped noticing time. Warren appeared at the door with a cup of water. Figured you could use this. Dorian took it. Thanks. Before the cup reached his mouth, Rook moved. It was fast, not aggressive, but sudden enough that Warren flinched. The dog's head snapped toward the desk. His ears sharpened, his nose lowered. He crossed the office in 3 controlled steps and nudged hard against Dorian's knee. The cup slipped. Water spilled across the desk edge, hit the floor, and spread beneath it. Damn, Warren muttered, stepping back. Rook pushed his muzzle under the desk. Rook, Dorian warned. The dog ignored him. There was a scratching sound, then a dull scrape. Rook backed out, pulling something with his teeth. A book. Small, leather-bound, its cover warped slightly from age and damp. Dust clung to the edges. It must have been wedged deep beneath the bottom drawer, where no casual glance would find it. Dorian crouched. Rook released the book into his hand. For a moment, the office seemed to shrink around him. Warren stared at the book. I never saw that. Dorian believed him. He opened it. The pages were filled with his father's handwriting. Not confessions, not prayers, not anything warm enough to be called a message. Numbers, dates, names, parts ordered, payments delayed, Supplier notes, project codes. It was not a diary in the sentimental sense. It was a working record, a map of pressure written by a man who had trusted paper more than people. Then Dorian saw the name. Caleb Rusk. Once. Then again. Then again. On one page, the name was circled so hard the pen had nearly torn through. Beneath it, in smaller writing, was a notation: Joint Bid/Northern Rail Retrofit/Review Contact Trail. Dorian turned the next page. There were more references to Caleb. Dates matched the months before the company began to collapse. Beside one entry, Daniel had written a short line. Something is wrong inside the house. Dorian read it twice. His mouth went dry. Inside the house, not inside the shop, not inside the contract, inside the house. Warren leaned in, then stopped himself, as if the page were a wound he had no right to touch. Caleb Rusk, Dorian said. Warren's face hardened. You know him? Everybody in this county knows Caleb. That doesn't answer me. Warren looked toward the shop floor, where the machines kept moving. He and your father were rivals before they were anything else. Both bid on the same major contracts. Caleb had money. Daniel had skill. That made Caleb angry. Why is his name all through this? Warren's eyes returned to the book. Maybe you should ask Caleb. Dorian noticed the carefulness in that answer. A man did not survive 65 years around machines by sticking fingers where they could be cut off. He closed the book. At the back, a small folded paper nearly slipped free. Dorian caught it and opened it. One line. Log-27/audio/check again. Nothing more. A file reference. A trail. Not proof. Not truth. Just a doorway. Dorian looked at the computer. For a moment he considered turning it on. Then Caleb's name pulsed in his mind like a flare. He needed to see the man before the file told him what to think. He needed to hear how Caleb spoke about Daniel Hale. Sometimes a man revealed more in contempt than in confession. Dorian stood. Where does Caleb work now? Warren's face changed. Not fear, exactly. The memory of fear. Rusk Industrial. Big glass building off County 9. Dorian tucked the book inside his jacket. Warren said, You going there alone? Dorian looked down at Rook. No. The drive to Rusk Industrial took 20 minutes. The building looked wrong for the town. Smooth, dark glass, polished stone, clean angles, a place designed to suggest that nothing messy had ever happened inside it. Dorian parked near the entrance. Rook stayed close as they crossed the lot. A receptionist with pale blonde hair and nervous hands led them to a private office after making one quiet phone call. She avoided Rook's eyes. Caleb Rusk stood behind a wide desk overlooking the industrial yard. He was in his early 50s, tall and trim, with silver-gray hair combed back from a high forehead. His face was narrow and clean-shaven, almost elegant, but there was a hardness around his mouth that made every smile feel premeditated. His suit was charcoal, tailored without flash. His hands were smooth, unlike Warren's, and rested lightly on the desk as if ownership itself required no effort. Dorian Hale, he said. The soldier son. His voice was pleasant. That made Dorian dislike it immediately. I'm looking at options for the workshop. Caleb smiled. Then you came to the right man. I found your name in my father's records. Of course you did. Your father was obsessed with me near the end. Rook shifted beside Dorian. Caleb noticed. Does he bite? Only when someone gives him a reason. The smile thinned. Caleb walked around the desk, slow and superior, like a priest strolling through a church built to himself. Your father was talented, he said. Brilliant even. But brilliance without discipline becomes sentiment. He kept old men on payroll, trusted people who slowed him down, and believed craftsmanship could beat leverage. His eyes settled on Dorian. It cannot. Dorian felt heat rise under his collar. Were you partners? Competitors? Caleb's voice sharpened with satisfaction. On the Northern Rail retrofit bid, your father thought skill would win. I understood timing, pressure, relationships. He mistook stubbornness for honor. He lost the bid? He lost more than that. The words hung there. Dorian heard the insult beneath them, a knife dressed as business philosophy. Caleb stepped closer. Let me give you advice your father refused. Sell the workshop before it finishes eating what remains of your life. I can take it off your hands. Quietly, cleanly. You walk away with something instead of drowning with ghosts. Dorian stared at him. What do you get? Caleb's smile returned. What I always get. Useful things at the proper price. A movement behind the frosted glass wall caught Dorian's eye. Not a full figure. Just a passing shape beyond the interior doorway. A woman's outline. The pale sweep of a beige coat. A flash of chestnut-brown hair. Then gone. Dorian's body went still. Sarah. Maybe. Not enough to prove. Enough to poison the room. Caleb saw his eyes shift. For the first time, something quick and irritated crossed the man's face. Something wrong? Caleb asked. Dorian looked back at him. No. But Rook was staring at the closed interior door now, every muscle quiet, every instinct awake. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. The room became too silent. Dorian understood then that the book had not given him an answer. It had given him the first true question. And whatever Caleb Rusk was hiding, Sarah Hale was close enough to cast a shadow on it. Dorian turned toward the door. I'll think about your offer. Caleb's voice followed him, smooth as ice over deep water. Think quickly. Men like your father always waited too long. Dorian did not look back. Outside, the cold struck his face cleanly. Rook walked beside him without a sound. Only when they reached the truck did Dorian touch the leather book beneath his jacket. The file waited back at the workshop. Caleb had given him contempt. Sarah had given him a shadow. And somewhere between them, his father had left a line in an old book that now felt less like a note and more like a warning. Dorian drove back to the workshop with Caleb Rusk's voice still sitting in his skull like a splinter. Men like your father always waited too long. The sentence should have made him angrier. Instead, it made him quiet. Anger was simple. Quiet was dangerous. Quiet gave old words room to rearrange themselves. Rook sat beside him in the passenger seat, body still, amber eyes reflecting the gray strip of road ahead. The German Shepherd had not relaxed since leaving Rusk Industrial. His ears remained half-raised, his nose occasionally lifting toward the air vents as though some scent from that polished office had followed them back into the cold. Dorian did not speak until the workshop came into view. Not enough, he murmured. The book. Caleb's contempt. The glimpse of that familiar coat. All of it was something. But it was not enough. He parked beside the shop door and stepped out into the sharp afternoon air. Inside the building, the machine still turned with patient, tired rhythm. Warren Pike looked up from the main lathe as Dorian entered. The old craftsman's face, with its square jaw, gray beard shadow, and deeply lined skin, did not ask questions. His eyes did. Dorian walked straight to the office. The computer waited on the metal desk. He placed the old leather-bound book beside the keyboard and opened to the page with the notation. Log-27/audio/check again. The machine took nearly a minute to wake. Its fan coughed. The screen flickered. Dorian's reflection appeared briefly in the dark glass-gray blue eyes, hard mouth, face too controlled for a man whose life had begun tilting under him. Rook sat at the office door. Warren stood just outside, not entering. Dorian opened folder after folder. Most were labeled with dull precision: invoices, bids, payroll, supplier lists, rail retrofit, revisions. Then he found it. A folder marked simply, Logs. Inside, dozens of files were arranged by number. Some were empty, some were corrupted. Some were routine equipment checks. Log-27_audio.wave. Dorian's finger hovered over the trackpad. He had spent years entering rooms where a wrong move could kill a man. Still, clicking that file felt harder than breaching a door. He pressed play. Static came first, then his father's voice. Not clear, not close. It sounded as if the recording had been made by accident from across a room. Not signing until the revision is in writing. A pause. Paper shifting. Then a woman's voice. Low. Controlled. You keep saying that like time is on your side. Dorian went still. Sarah. The voice was muffled, but he knew it. Another voice entered. Male. Smooth. Too calm. You're going to lose the bid if you hesitate, Daniel. You know that. Dorian's stomach tightened. Caleb. The audio cracked and skipped. Part of the conversation vanished into static. When it returned, his father sounded tired. This isn't the agreement we built, Caleb replied, almost amused. Agreements change. Winners adapt. Then Sarah, sharper this time. Or maybe winners don't drag everyone else down with their pride. The file ended there. No confession, no clean admission, no sentence a lawyer could place before a judge like a sword. Only voices, pressure, timing. A room Dorian had never entered, where his father had stood alone and heard the people around him call fear wisdom. For several seconds, Dorian did not move. Warren spoke from the doorway. That enough? Dorian looked at the screen. No. His voice sounded colder than he expected. But it's enough to know Caleb lied. Warren stepped inside slowly. He looked older in the office light, not frail, but worn in places the shop had not reached. His heavy hands hung at his sides. Daniel suspected, Warren said. Never proved. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out before Dorian could stop it. Warren's eyes softened for the first time. Maybe because sons don't always hear fathers when anger is louder. That struck deeper than Dorian wanted. He closed the file. Something in him settled. Not peace, not forgiveness. Something harder. Decision. He walked out of the office and onto the shop floor. The old men looked up. Tom, thin and stooped, held a tray of small machined pieces against his chest. Eddie sat beside a measuring station, yellowed gray mustache twitching as he watched. Lewis, broad-faced and slow-moving after the stroke that had stiffened one side of his body, rested his good hand on a workbench. They were waiting without admitting it. Dorian looked at Warren. What jobs are open? Warren blinked once. You mean current orders? I mean anything that brings money in fast. Warren's jaw tightened. Fast breaks old machines. Not if we manage it. Warren studied him. The silence between them filled with the ghost of another Hale man who had probably said something similar years before. We've got a small municipal parts order, Warren said at last. Snowplow linkage brackets. Low margin. Due in 4 days. Can we double it? Eddie gave a short laugh from his station. Warren did not. No. Dorian looked at him. Why? Because that machine is older than half the men in this town. Because the steel stock isn't consistent. Because we inspect every 5th piece for a reason. Inspect every 10th, Dorian said. Warren's eyes narrowed. That's not how we do it. It is if we want to keep the doors open. There it was. the thing inside him Caleb had touched. The need to answer contempt with results. The need to make the shop stand quickly, visibly, undeniably. The need to prove that his father had not left only ruins. Dorian told himself it was discipline, strategy, pressure management. But beneath that, something less noble burned. He wanted to win fast enough to silence the dead. By evening, the shop changed. Machines that had been running like old horses were pushed into a pace closer to panic. Warren adjusted what he could, lips pressed tight. Tom hauled finished parts to the inspection table. Eddie measured with shaking hands, muttering numbers under his breath. Lewis packed pieces carefully, his slower movements now forced to fit a rhythm that did not belong to him. Dorian moved everywhere. He tracked orders, checked tools, called suppliers, reworked the schedule, ran numbers on a legal pad until the columns blurred. Rook followed him at first, then stopped near the main line. The dog watched the machine. Not the people. The machine. A low vibration had begun beneath its steady clatter, too soft for most ears, too deep for human distraction. Rook's head tilted, his nostrils flared, his body stiffened. Dorian was on the phone with a buyer from the municipal maintenance department, a man named Carl Dennett. Carl was in his 40s, with a practical, impatient voice, and no room for heroic stories. To him, Hale Precision Works was not a tragedy. It was a vendor at risk of missing delivery. "You said Friday," Carl warned. "You'll have them Friday," Dorian said. "Your father said things too." Dorian's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm not my father." Across the shop, Warren turned his head slightly. Rook gave one sharp bark. Everyone froze. Dorian lowered the phone. The bark came again. Not fear, command. Rook stepped toward the main machine, then backed away, eyes fixed on the lower housing. Warren moved first. "Shut it down!" Dorian snapped. "Wait." Warren looked at him. "Shut it down!" The machine coughed. A thin metallic scream cut through the shop. Then the belt lurched. Tom, startled, dropped the tray. Parts scattered across the floor like silver teeth. Lewis tried to step back too quickly and struck his hip against the bench. Eddie reached toward the emergency switch, but his hand shook and missed. Dorian crossed the floor in 3 strides and hit the switch. The machine shuddered to a stop. For 1 second, there was only silence. Then Lewis groaned. He had gone down on one knee, one hand pressed against his forearm. A shallow cut ran along the skin where a flying burr had sliced him. Not deep, not life-threatening. But blood still looked obscene on an old man's sleeve. Dorian crouched beside him. "You hit?" Lewis tried to smile, embarrassed. "Not dead yet." Warren brought a first aid kit and knelt with the calm anger of a man who had expected this and hated being right. Dorian looked at the broken parts on the floor, the stopped machine, the ruined batch, the workers' faces. His chest felt hollow. This was not combat. There was no enemy fire, no smoke, no command structure. And still he had walked them into damage because he had mistaken speed for control. Warren cleaned Lewis's cut. Then he looked up at Dorian. "I've seen this before." Dorian said nothing. Warren's voice stayed low, but every man in the shop heard it. "Daniel did it too. Tried to outrun pressure. Tried to carry panic like it was strength. Machines don't care how much a man needs to win." The words landed like iron dropped into water. Dorian stood slowly. He looked at Rook. The dog was still near the machine housing, ears pinned slightly, breathing hard through his nose. He had known first. Not the meaning, not the business, not the debt, just the danger. Dorian stepped closer to the machine. Warren followed and removed the lower panel. Inside, A bearing assembly had begun to fracture. Another hour, maybe less, and the failure could have destroyed the entire drive shaft. Or hurt someone worse than Lewis. Dorian stared at the damaged metal. A small thing. A nearly hidden thing. Enough to break everything. He thought of his father then, not as the weak man from memory, but as a tired man surrounded by pressure, hearing voices tell him to move faster, risk more, trust less, decide now. For the first time, Dorian did not ask why Daniel had failed. He asked what failure had sounded like before it arrived. Maybe it had sounded like a machine pushed past warning. Maybe it had sounded like men too loyal to leave. Maybe it had sounded like a son saying, "I'm not my father," while becoming him anyway. The municipal order was ruined. Carl Dennett refused partial delivery when Dorian called him back. The buyer's voice went flat with disappointment. "Then we're done," Carl said. "I can't risk my department on this." Dorian did not argue. After the call, he wrote a check from his personal account to cover the cost of replacement materials and the penalty. It took nearly everything he had left liquid. No one thanked him. That was good. He had not earned gratitude. Night settled over the workshop. The old men moved slower now, quieter. Lewis sat with his bandaged arm resting on the table, pretending the cut did not ache. Eddie swept scattered parts into a bin. Tom collected damaged pieces like a priest gathering broken offerings. Dorian stood near the dead machine with Warren. "I pushed too hard," he said. Warren wiped oil from his hands. "Yes. No comfort, no cruelty, just truth." Dorian looked across the floor. "You warned me." "Yes." "I didn't listen." "No." A dry, unexpected breath left Dorian. It was almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. Warren glanced at him. "Your father didn't listen the first time either." Dorian looked at the old man. "And the second?" Warren's face changed. "He didn't get enough second chances." That sentence stayed. Dorian turned toward the office, where the old computer sat waiting with its incomplete file and unanswered questions. Then he looked back at the shop floor, at the men his father had kept when the world had already decided they were finished. This was not a ruin, it was a test, and he had failed the first part. Rook came to him then, slow and steady. The dog pressed his shoulder against Dorian's leg, not asking, not forgiving, just present. Dorian lowered one hand to the German shepherd's head. "We slow down," he said. Warren heard him. "So we're keeping it?" Dorian looked at the broken machine, the bandaged worker, the old men, the office, the dark windows, the debt gathering outside like wolves beyond firelight. Then he nodded. "Yes." The word did not feel heroic. It felt like responsibility. And responsibility, he was beginning to understand, did not roar like victory. Sometimes it stood in a cold workshop beside old men and a wounded machine, admitting the first mistake before it became the last. By morning, the workshop smelled different. Not cleaner, not safer, not redeemed, just honest. The damaged machine sat silent near the center of the floor, its lower panel removed, the exposed bearing assembly resting on a rag like a broken tooth pulled from an old animal. The ruined batch of snowplow linkage brackets had been stacked in a red scrap bin. Someone had swept the metal shavings before sunrise. Someone else had written the failed order number in chalk on the wall beside the inspection table. No one tried to hide what had happened. That was Warren Pike's doing. The old craftsman had arrived before Dorian, though Dorian had slept only 3 hours in the chair inside his father's office. Warren had made coffee in a dented metal pot, bandaged Lewis's arm again, and marked the failed pieces so nobody would accidentally mix them with usable stock. He did not lecture. That was worse. Dorian stepped onto the shop floor with Rook beside him, the German Shepherd moving slower than usual, not because he was tired, but because he seemed to be reading the mood of every man in the room. His amber eyes passed over Lewis's bandaged forearm, Eddie's stiff fingers, Tom's hunched shoulders, and then Warren's face. The dog stopped beside the silent machine. Then he looked at Dorian. No bark, no warning. Just that steady animal stare. Dorian understood it too well. You saw it. Now do something different. He walked to the center of the floor. The old men looked up. No one spoke. Outside, wind dragged loose snow against the metal siding, making the building creak like a ship caught in ice. Dorian removed his gloves and set them on a workbench. Yesterday was my mistake, he said. The words fell hard. Tom's eyes flickered. Eddie lowered the caliper he had been cleaning. Lewis shifted on his stool, his injured arm resting against his ribs. Warren only watched. I pushed production before I understood the machines, the workflow, or the people keeping this place alive. I ignored warnings. A man got hurt. We lost the order. I paid the penalty, but that doesn't fix the mistake. The shop remained silent. Dorian forced himself not to fill it. In the SEAL teams, silence after an error meant assessment, damage, cause, correction. Emotion came later, if at all. But this silence was different. It belonged to men who had seen promises fail before, men who had learned that speeches were cheaper than replacement parts. Finally, Warren spoke. What now? Dorian looked at him. That depends on all of you. Eddie gave a short, skeptical cough. Dorian continued. I'm not running this floor alone. Warren controls technical operations. If he says a machine stops, it stops. Eddie handles inspection frequency. Tom tracks finished and rejected parts. Lewis manages packing and order logs from the bench. Lewis blinked, surprised. I ain't fast. I don't need fast, Dorian said. I need accurate. Something shifted in the old man's face. Not pride exactly. Pride had been bruised out of him years ago, but usefulness returned like warmth under ash. Warren leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed. And you? I handle debt, clients, suppliers, and legal review. Every decision that affects production gets shown to you before it happens. Warren studied him for a long moment. Shown? Shown. Not told after? Dorian swallowed. No. That was the first real repair of the day. Not the machine. That word. The work restarted slowly. Painfully slowly. The kind of slow that made Dorian's nerves tighten beneath his skin. Warren began by refusing to touch the municipal order again until the main lathe was fully inspected. Eddie set up a new quality checklist by hand, writing in block letters on a yellow legal pad because the old printer jammed every third page. Tom reorganized stock by grade instead of by convenience. Lewis built a simple tracking sheet from the order forms, his good hand moving with careful, stubborn concentration. Dorian wanted to hurry them. More than once, he felt the urge rise. Step in, simplify, override, push. Each time, Rook seemed to appear at his side. Not dramatically, not as if the dog understood business. But the German Shepherd would stand close enough that Dorian felt the pressure of his warm body against his leg, grounding him like a hand on a soldier's shoulder before a breach. By noon, the pace had changed. Not fast, steady. The building began to sound less like panic and more like work. It reminded Dorian of something he had forgotten from training. The best teams did not move because one man shouted. They moved because every man understood his lane and trusted the others to hold theirs. His father had known machines. Maybe he had never learned teams, or maybe he had learned too late. At 2 p.m, Warren brought him a box from the storage room. It was old cardboard, soft at the corners, marked D. Hale/legal/contracts in black marker. "Found this behind the compressor cabinet," Warren said. "Daniel kept moving things when he got worried." Dorian looked at the box. "Worried about what?" Warren rubbed his thumb over a scar on his knuckle. "Everybody." Inside were contract drafts, supplier letters, bid documents, and printed emails with notes scribbled in the margins. Dorian carried the box into the office and spread the papers across the desk. Rook settled near the door, muzzle resting on his paws, eyes half closed but not asleep. The name Northern Rail Retrofit appeared again and again. So did Caleb Rusk's company. Dates overlapped in ways Dorian did not yet understand. Terms changed between versions. Delivery windows narrowed. Penalty clauses sharpened. A part specification had been revised 3 times in 2 weeks, each revision pushing Hale Precision Works closer to impossible. Dorian stared at the paper until the words blurred. This was not proof, but it was pattern. And pattern, in the field, was how men stayed alive. He needed someone who could read it as law, not instinct. The attorney who answered Warren's recommendation was named Mara Ellison. She arrived just after sunset in a small blue sedan with 1 cracked headlight and a back seat full of file boxes. Mara was 34, tall and narrow-shouldered, with dark auburn hair pulled into a severe knot at the back of her head. Her face was pale from long hours indoors, with sharp cheekbones, tired hazel eyes, and a mouth that looked like it had learned to distrust easy answers. She wore a charcoal coat over a plain navy suit, practical winter boots, and no jewelry except a thin silver watch. She looked less like a lawyer from a glossy office, and more like someone who had spent too many nights fighting landlords, banks, and men who smiled while stealing. Warren introduced her simply. Mara used to handle small business disputes before she started taking cases nobody else wanted. Mara gave him a dry look. That's one way to describe being underpaid. Her voice was calm, low, and edged with humor so dry it almost missed being humor at all. Dorian shook her hand. Her grip was firm. "You're Daniel Hale's son," she said. "Yes." "I met your father twice. He was impossible." Dorian paused. Mara continued. "Impossible men sometimes have useful paperwork." She stepped into the office and looked at the spread documents. Her expression changed immediately. The tiredness remained, but something sharper came alive behind it. "Who else has seen these?" "Warren. Me. Keep it that way for now." Dorian watched her sort the pages. She did not read like a normal person. Her eyes moved in sections. Dates first, signatures, version numbers, clause changes, delivery language, penalty triggers. She made small piles without explaining them. After 20 minutes, she tapped 1 page. This revision should not exist. Dorian leaned closer. Why? It changes the technical requirement after preliminary acceptance, but before final bid award. That's not illegal by itself. But if your father had already committed capital based on the prior spec, this would have put him in a chokehold. A trap, Mara's eyes stayed on the paper. Maybe just predatory contracting. The law often gives ugly things polite names. She found another page. And this supplier substitution, who authorized it? Dorian looked. I don't know. Mara turned the document toward him. The initials beside the approval line were not Daniel's. Dorian felt his pulse slow. Not calm. Focus, Mara noticed. You recognize them? No, he said, but I might know who can. From the shop floor came the sound of Warren calling for Tom to check a belt alignment. A moment later, Eddie complained that Tom could not see straight unless the part insulted him first. Lewis laughed softly. It was the first laughter Dorian had heard in the building. Rook lifted his head. Then he did something strange. He rose, walked to the office shelf, and pressed his nose against the lowest drawer of a battered gray filing cabinet. Dorian watched him. "What is it?" Rook pawed once at the drawer. Mara looked from the dog to Dorian. "Does he do that often?" "Only when I'm missing something." Dorian opened the drawer. Inside were old personnel files, tax forms, maintenance receipts. Nothing obvious. Rook pushed his muzzle deeper, then sneezed sharply, backing away as dust rose. A small envelope had slipped behind the hanging folders. Dorian pulled it free. It was marked in Daniel Hale's handwriting. Payroll changes/Sarah review. The room went still. Dorian did not open it at once. The name alone was enough to make every sound in the workshop seem farther away. Mara's voice softened, but not much. "If that relates to internal authorization, we need to document the chain before touching too much." Dorian almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because law, unlike grief, insisted on order. His father had left no confession, no explanation, no plea. Only paper buried where dust could guard it, and a dog stubborn enough to notice what men stepped over. Dorian set the envelope on the desk. "Photograph everything before we open it," he said. Mara looked at him for the first time with something like approval. "Good." The reorganization of the shop continued late into the night. Warren refused to restart the main line until the damaged assembly was replaced. Eddie marked every questionable part with red paint. Tom built a salvage pile from pieces that could be reworked. Lewis updated the board with new deadlines, realistic ones, not heroic ones. Dorian called 2 smaller clients and told them the truth. Not all of it. Enough. "We're rebuilding process," he said. "I won't promise speed we can't deliver." One client hung up. The other, a farmer named Rafe Milner, agreed to a smaller repair order if Warren personally signed off on the parts. Rafe was an older man with a gravel voice and no patience for corporate polish. He said he had trusted Daniel once and might trust the shop again, but only if it stopped pretending to be bigger than it was. Dorian accepted. After the call, he stood by the office window and watched the shop floor. It no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like a wounded thing being handled carefully. Mara worked at the desk behind him, photographing documents with her phone, labeling evidence bags she had pulled from her briefcase. She had not promised justice. That made him trust her more. Warren came to stand beside Dorian. "You did better today," the old man said. Dorian looked at him. "That's supposed to make me feel good?" "No." A pause. "Just means you can learn." Dorian watched Rook move slowly between the workers, accepting a brief touch from Lewis, then sitting near the machine as if keeping watch over the old beast that had nearly turned on them. For the first time since coming home, Dorian felt the shape of his father's life not as a failure, but as a burden left unfinished. A burden was not meant to be worshipped. It was meant to be redistributed before it crushed the next man. He turned back to the documents. "Tomorrow," he said, "we keep working." Warren nodded. "And?" Dorian looked at the envelope with Sarah's name on it. "And we find out who changed the rules while my father was trying to survive them." Outside, the snow began again, quiet and thin. Inside, the old workshop kept its lights on. Not bright, but steady. By morning, the envelope with Sarah's name on it had become heavier than any machine part in the shop. It sat inside a clear evidence sleeve on the corner of Daniel Hale's old desk, photographed, labeled, and untouched, until Mara Ellison finished building what she called the first clean chain. She said it without drama, but Dorian understood the importance. In a firefight, a man could act on instinct. In court, instinct was only noise unless it could be proven. Mara worked with the focus of someone who trusted paper more than people. Her auburn hair had loosened slightly from its knot, and tired strands framed her pale face, but her hazel eyes stayed sharp. She had taken over the office with a legal pad, sticky notes, document sleeves, and a thermos of coffee that smelled burned enough to count as punishment. Dorian stood by the window, watching the shop floor beyond the glass. Warren Pike moved between machines with his usual steady gravity. Tom stacked reworked pieces. Eddie inspected tolerances with a magnifier clipped to his glasses. Lewis, one arm still bandaged, logged each completed part with slow precision. None of them looked heroic. They looked old, sore, and necessary. That made them matter more. Rook lay near the office door, head on his paws, amber eyes half open. The German shepherd's sable coat looked darker in the shop's weak light, the black harness and red trim like a small mark of warning against his fur. He had not left Dorian's side for long since the machine failure. Not clingy. Rook was never clingy, just present, like a quiet oath. Mara finally opened the envelope. Inside were 3 payroll adjustment forms, 2 internal authorization slips, and a printed email thread with half the header missing. She read them once, then again. Her mouth tightened. "What?" Dorian asked. Mara did not answer immediately. She laid the pages in order by date. "Your father didn't authorize these supplier changes." Dorian came closer. "The initials?" "Not his, not Warren's either. These were internal approvals that allowed materials to be rerouted through a secondary supplier." "Caleb?" "Indirectly." Mara tapped one printed line. "The supplier had a holding relationship with Rusk Industrial, not obvious on the surface, but it's there if you look long enough." Dorian stared at the paper. It should have felt like victory, this small confirmation that his father had not imagined everything. Instead, it felt like kneeling beside a grave and realizing the dead had been trying to speak through invoices. Mara continued. Someone inside the Hale household had access to Daniel's administrative files, someone who could delay notices, approve changes, or make sure the wrong papers reached him at the wrong time. Dorian's jaw tightened. "Sarah." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Mara looked at him over the top of the page. "That attitude will get you in trouble." "I've been in trouble." "Not this kind," she said. "This kind smiles in court and asks where your proof is." He looked away. Outside the office, a machine started again, slow and cautious. The sound had changed since yesterday. Not faster. Cleaner. Warren had insisted on replacing the bearing assembly before allowing even test work. Dorian had wanted to argue, and had not. That restraint still felt like swallowing gravel. Mara opened another folder from the contract box. "Here," she said. Dorian turned back. The bid revision on Northern Rail retrofit came 3 days after the supplier adjustment. That means Hale Precision was already dependent on altered material flow when the technical requirements changed. Your father couldn't pivot without bleeding cash. So Caleb boxed him in. "Possibly." "Mara." She held his gaze. "Possibly," she repeated, "because the law doesn't care what we feel is obvious." Dorian almost smiled at that. Almost. Then Mara pulled out one final page and set it down. This is what matters. It was a letter from Northern Rail Procurement, acknowledging receipt of revised compliance documentation from Hale Precision Works. The date was wrong. Not by much. Just enough. Dorian saw it before Mara explained. "That was submitted before my father signed the final version." "Yes." "Someone sent documents before he agreed to the changes." "Yes." And that made it look like he accepted. Mara's eyes hardened. Now you're thinking like a lawyer. Rook lifted his head. No sound had changed. No one had entered. But the dog rose in one smooth motion and turned towards the front of the shop. Dorian noticed immediately. What is it? Rook walked to the office threshold, body still but ears forward. A moment later, Warren's voice carried from the floor. You've got company. Sarah Hale stood just inside the main entrance. She looked wrong in the workshop. Not because she was overdressed, though she was. Her long beige wool coat was spotless. Her black gloves fitted perfectly. Her chestnut brown hair brushed smooth around her pale face. It was the same controlled elegance Dorian had seen at her townhouse, the same polished survival. But here, among oil-stained floors and old men who had given their bodies to work, she looked less like a widow and more like a porcelain cup set beside a furnace. Her eyes found Dorian through the office glass. For 1 second, something flickered in them. Fear. Then it vanished beneath softness. Dorian stepped out with Rook at his side. The shop went quiet around them. Warren did not move from the machine. Eddie lowered his tools. Tom and Lewis watched without pretending not to. Sarah clasped her gloved hands. Dorian, she said. Her voice trembled, carefully. Too carefully. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. Dorian stopped several feet away from her. No? I was angry, tired. Daniel and I, we ended badly. That doesn't mean I wanted this. Rook's ears angled back, not in fear, but in attention. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah's hands. Sarah noticed the dog and swallowed. I came to apologize. Behind Dorian, Mara stepped from the office doorway. She did not introduce herself. She only watched, pale face, calm, legal mind already measuring every breath. Sarah's gaze flicked to her, then back to Dorian. I heard you were trying to keep the shop, Sarah said. I thought maybe I could help. The words entered the room like warm air carrying rot beneath it. Dorian said nothing. Sarah took 1 step closer. I know you don't trust me. I don't blame you, but I lived with Daniel. I saw things. I might remember things that matter. Mara's expression did not change, but Dorian felt her attention sharpen. Rook moved, not toward Sarah, toward the office. He placed himself between Sarah and the doorway where the documents lay. The movement was small. The effect was not. Sarah froze. For a breath, the whole workshop seemed to understand something before Dorian did. Warren's eyes narrowed. Mara looked down at Rook, then back at Sarah. Dorian felt a cold line run through him. Rook had not reacted like a dog guarding a room. He had reacted like a witness guarding unfinished truth. Dorian turned slightly, enough to see Sarah's face. The softness was still there, but beneath it, the mask had cracked at the edges. Help how? He asked. Sarah recovered quickly. There were files at the house, conversations. I didn't understand them then. You said you had nothing. I was afraid. Of Caleb? Her eyes widened. Just a little. Enough. Dorian heard Warren shift behind him. Mara made a note on her pad without looking down. Sarah whispered, You saw me there. It was not a question. Dorian did not answer. Sarah's chin lifted. The wounded softness changed into something sharper, something closer to the woman who had once blocked her doorway with her body and said Daniel had made his choices. Caleb uses people, she said. You think I don't know that now? Now? He told me Daniel was going to ruin us, that the shop was already dying, that if I stayed I'd be buried under his debts. And you believed him. I believed what I needed to believe. There it was. Not remorse, Not confession. Survival dressed as regret. Dorian stepped closer. Why come back today? Sarah looked toward the office again. Rook's body stiffened. I told you. To help. Dorian let the silence stretch. He had learned long ago that guilty people hated space. They rushed to fill it. They explained before questions were asked. They handed you stories hoping you would mistake motion for truth. Sarah's fingers tightened around her gloves. Finally, she said, If Caleb thinks I'm helping you, he'll come after me. Mara spoke for the first time. Is that a warning or a request? Sarah turned to her. And you are? Someone who writes things down. Sarah's eyes hardened. Dorian saw then that Sarah had come expecting the soldier son, angry, direct, easy to steer. She had not expected a tired lawyer with a dry voice, old workers who remembered too much, or a German shepherd who treated the office door like sacred ground. He made a decision. Not because he trusted her, because she was afraid of Caleb, and fear could be useful if handled carefully. You can help, Dorian said. Mara's eyes snapped to him. Warren's face darkened. Sarah looked almost relieved. Dorian continued, but not alone, not off record, not near documents unless Mara is present. You give statements, dates, names, anything you remember. Sarah hesitated. That hesitation told him more than agreement would have. Fine, she said. Dorian nodded once. Then he did something colder. He let Tom hear him say, People should know Sarah came in willingly. Tom's eyebrows lifted. He understood enough. Old towns carried news faster than wires when the right old men were nearby. Sarah's eyes flashed. What does that mean? It means if you're really here to help, Caleb will know soon. Her face drained by a shade. You're using me. No, Dorian said. I'm letting you choose where you stand. For a moment, Sarah looked at him, as if seeing Daniel Hale through a son she had underestimated. It angered her. It frightened her more. She turned away. I'll come back tomorrow, she said. No, Mara answered. You'll sit now. Sarah looked at Dorian. Dorian did not rescue her from the lawyer. That, more than anything, seemed to convince her that the rules had changed. They took her statement in the office, while Rook remained by the door. Sarah did not confess. She circled. She minimized. She described Caleb as persuasive, then as concerned, then as someone who understood business better than Daniel. She admitted to forwarding emails, claimed she did not know they would be used against the company, claimed she thought she was protecting herself. Mara asked questions that cut without raising blood. Dates, devices, who called first, which documents, which account. Sarah answered less smoothly each time. Dorian listened and said almost nothing. At one point, Sarah glanced at him. Your father loved you, she said suddenly. Dorian's chest tightened. Mara looked up. Sarah's voice softened, this time less performed. That was part of it. He kept saying if you came home, he wanted the shop clean enough that you wouldn't inherit shame. The room went very still. Dorian felt the words enter him slowly, like cold water through cracked stone. He did not know if Sarah said it to hurt him, manipulate him, or because some fragment of truth had escaped before she could dress it. It did not matter. It hurt either way. When Sarah left an hour later, the shop had already begun murmuring. Not loudly, not gossip, just motion. A town did not need proof to start watching. Mara packed her notes. That was reckless, she said. Yes. Potentially useful. Yes. She glanced at him. You did that on purpose? Yes. Warren came into the office after Sarah's car pulled away. Caleb will hear. Dorian looked out through the dirty glass toward the road. I know. Warren folded his thick arms. That man doesn't like losing control. Dorian thought of Caleb's polished office, his smooth hands, his voice saying useful things at the proper price. He hasn't lost it yet. Rook stood beside Dorian and stared at the same road Sarah had taken. A low sound moved in the dog's chest. Not a growl, not yet. Dorian rested a hand on his harness. Outside, snow dusted the tire tracks Sarah had left behind, softening them but not erasing them. Inside, the old workshop held its breath. Dorian had not exposed Caleb. Not fully, but he had touched the board. And somewhere across town, a man who preferred moving other people's pieces would soon realize one of them had moved without permission. Caleb Rusk did not strike like an angry man. That was what made him dangerous. Angry men left fingerprints. They shouted, rushed, forgot doors, forgot cameras, forgot that fear made witnesses remember details. Caleb was not that kind of enemy. He had built his life around clean surfaces and indirect pressure. If he wanted something broken, he preferred for the thing to appear as though it had simply failed under its own weight. By the next morning, the workshop felt that pressure before anyone said his name. A supplier called at 7:30 to delay a shipment of replacement bearings. A customer called at 8:10 to ask whether the legal trouble around Hale Precision Works was going to affect delivery. At 9, Warren Pike found a box of steel stock left outside the receiving door instead of on the covered dock, its outer packaging damp from overnight snow. "Driver claimed he was in a hurry," Tom said, rubbing his thin hands together against the cold. Warren stood over the crate with his heavy arms folded. His weathered face looked carved from old oak, gray beard shadow darkening his jaw. He did not touch the material yet. Dorian came beside him, Rook close at his left leg. The German shepherd lowered his head. At first, he only sniffed. Then his body changed. Not much. A tightening through the shoulders, a stillness in the tail. The amber eyes narrowed toward the damp crate as if it were not a box of metal, but a snake sleeping in snow. Dorian noticed. "What?" Rook sniffed again, then stepped back. Warren looked from the dog to the crate. "That steel is for Rafe Milner's repair order," he said. "We needed it today." "Open it," Dorian said. Warren cut the banding with tin snips. The top layer looked fine long bars of steel, dull gray, tagged with the right grade. Eddie came over from the inspection table, magnifier still clipped to his glasses. Eddie was small and wiry, his yellowed gray mustache twitching with annoyance. His hands shook when resting, but when he touched metal, they steadied like a priest's over a relic. He lifted one bar. "Weight feels off." Warren's eyes sharpened. Dorian watched them test the first 3 pieces. Surface marks. Hardness check. Measurement. All wrong. Not dramatically wrong. That would have been easier. Just wrong enough. Wrong enough to pass a glance. Wrong enough to fail under strain. Warren set the bar down carefully. "This isn't our grade." Tom swore under his breath. Lewis, seated at the order board with his bandaged arm resting stiffly near the ledger, went pale. The older man's broad face seemed to fold inward with dread. "If we'd run that, it could shear," Eddie said. Warren looked at Dorian. "Under load." The shop went silent. Dorian felt the old instinct rise. Secure the material, isolate the chain, identify breach, assess hostile action. A battlefield had rules even when it looked like chaos. This was uglier. A man could hide cowardice inside paperwork and call it business. Rook gave a low sound. This time, it was a growl. Not loud. Not theatrical. A warning pulled from deep in his chest. Dorian crouched beside him, one hand on the black harness edged with dark red trim. "You smelled it?" Rook's nose remained pointed at the steel. Oil, snow, metal, and something else perhaps. A chemical residue. a handling scent, a wrongness no human in the room had been born to read. Dorian stood. Nothing from this crate goes on a machine. Warren nodded once. That was already true. Mara Ellison arrived 20 minutes later, her blue sedan sliding slightly on the icy gravel as she parked beside the loading dock. She stepped out in her charcoal coat, auburn hair tied back, face pale from another short night. She carried a camera bag, gloves, and a temper she kept under legal vocabulary. When Dorian showed her the crate, her hazel eyes went flat. "Did anyone sign for delivery?" Tom raised a hand weakly. "I did. Driver was new, young guy. Said the usual man had the flu." Mara looked at him. "Description." Tom blinked, then straightened, embarrassed to be treated like a witness and not an old man to be managed. Late 20s, thin, patchy beard, red knit cap, green jacket, nervous hands, wouldn't look at the dog. Rook's ears moved at the word dog. Mara wrote it down. Truck markings? Plain white box truck, no company logo. Warren's jaw worked. "Our supplier doesn't use plain trucks." Mara looked at Dorian. Caleb heard. Dorian did not ask how. He had wanted Caleb to hear that Sarah had spoken. He had wanted the board touched. He had wanted reaction. Now reaction sat in a crate by the receiving door, waiting to turn into injury. A small, bitter thought passed through him. He had wanted to prove his father had been cornered by people like Caleb. Now Caleb was teaching him what cornering felt like. The day changed after that. Dorian did not shut the shop down. He wanted to. Every protective instinct screamed for lockdown, isolation, full control. Instead, he did what Chapter 3 had nearly cost him to learn. He gathered the men. All of them. Warren stood beside the silent crate. Eddie leaned on the inspection bench. Tom clutched his wool cap in both hands. Lewis sat near the order board, his bandaged arm held carefully against his side. Mara stood near the office door, arms folded, watching not as a commander but as a recorder of consequences. Dorian told them the truth. Not all of it. Not the pieces still forming around Sarah, Caleb, and his father's old contracts. Enough. "This delivery was wrong," he said. "Maybe by mistake, maybe not. We document everything. We inspect everything twice. Nobody rushes. Nobody runs material because we need money. If anything feels off, it stops." Warren's eyes held his. The old man understood the cost of those words. Slower production meant less money. Less money meant the debt pressed closer. But bad material meant blood. Dorian looked at Lewis's bandaged arm. "We don't buy time with people." For a moment, no one moved. Then Warren nodded. "Aye." It was not a military word from his mouth. It sounded older, like a craftsman's oath. They worked, slowly, carefully. The replacement stock came from a local salvage yard after Warren called in an old favor. Rafe Milner's order was reduced again, but not lost. Mara took photos of the crate, labels, delivery slip, and altered stock. She called the supplier. The supplier denied sending a substitute truck. She recorded the call. By afternoon, the workshop had regained its rhythm, but the air had teeth now. Every sound made Dorian turn. Every truck outside drew Rook's attention. At 4:30, Sarah called. Dorian let it ring twice before answering. Her voice came low, strained. "You shouldn't have let people talk." Dorian looked through the office glass toward the shop floor. Rook stood near the door, already watching him. "Caleb heard?" A pause. "He knows enough. Did he contact you?" "Not directly." "Sarah." Her breath hitched. Beneath the practiced polish, fear had begun to crack her voice into something more human and less useful. "He sent someone. Not to me. Near my place. A car sat outside for an hour. Do you have proof? No. Then come in and give Mara another statement. No, she said too quickly. Dorian closed his eyes. Sarah. I can't. You mean you won't? I mean you don't understand what he does to people. Dorian opened his eyes. Across the shop, Rook suddenly lifted his head toward the loading bay. Dorian saw it before he heard anything. The dog moved from stillness into alert in one breath, body low, ears forward, gaze locked beyond the receiving doors. Hold on, Dorian said into the phone. What is it? He did not answer. Rook walked toward the rear of the shop, not running, not barking, tracking. Dorian followed. Warren saw them and set down a wrench. Mara came out of the office, phone still in hand from her last supplier call. The old man watched as Rook stopped at the side service door near the compressor room. The door was closed, but not latched. Dorian raised one hand. Everyone stilled. He drew no weapon. There was no reason yet, only a door, a dog, and the sudden awareness that the workshop's familiar noises had thinned around them. Rook sniffed the bottom seam. Then he looked back at Dorian. Once. That was all. Dorian opened the door. Cold air rushed in. No one stood outside. The narrow alley beside the building held only stacked pallets, a rusted scrap bin, and old snow marked by tire tracks. But the compressor room beyond the service entry smelled wrong sharp, chemical, metallic. Warren swore. A fuel line on the auxiliary compressor had been loosened. Not cut. Loosened. Enough to leak, enough to create failure when the unit ran under load, enough to look like neglect from an old shop already known for worn machines. Dorian stared at it, and for 1 second all the years of training, discipline, and buried anger aligned into something very cold. Caleb had not sent a man to attack him. He had sent a problem designed to make Dorian look like his father. Careless, overextended, unsafe, finished. Mara came up beside him. Her face went colorless. Don't touch anything. Warren's voice shook with anger. We ran that compressor this morning. Not since the steel delivery, Eddie whispered from behind them. Tom crossed himself, a small frightened gesture he seemed embarrassed by immediately. Lewis said nothing. His eyes fixed on the loose line as though seeing his own blood from yesterday waiting for someone else. Dorian looked at Rook. The dog stood near the threshold, breathing steadily, one paw slightly lifted from the cold concrete outside. Snow dusted his muzzle. His amber eyes remained locked on the damaged line, not triumphant, not proud, only certain. Dorian crouched and placed one hand against Rook's shoulder. Good boy, he said softly. The words sounded too small. Rook had not saved a part. He had saved the shop from becoming a headline. Mara began photographing everything. Warren shut down the compressor panel without disturbing the line. Dorian called the sheriff's department from the office, while Mara stood beside him, mouthing exactly what to say. Suspected tampering, potential equipment hazard, documented material irregularity, legal counsel present. The deputy who arrived was young, broad-faced, and serious. Deputy Cole Brannigan was 28, with sandy hair flattened under a winter cap and reddish skin from cold patrol shifts. His uniform jacket was too new, his boots too clean, but his eyes were earnest and tired in a way that suggested he wanted to be taken seriously and feared missing something important. He listened more than he spoke, which Dorian appreciated. Cole photographed the service door, tire tracks, compressor line, and the crate of wrong steel. He wrote down Tom's description of the delivery driver. He took Mara's card and Warren's statement. No arrests, no dramatic justice, just documentation. That was how real threats entered the system, one careful note at a time. When the deputy left, darkness had settled. The men did not go home immediately. They lingered near the shop floor, drawn together by what had almost happened. No one joked. Even Eddie's complaints had gone quiet. Dorian returned to Sarah's call. She had hung up long ago. 5 minutes later, a text came through from an unknown number. No greeting, no apology, just a photo. It showed a document, folded at the edges, with Caleb Rusk's name in the header and Sarah Hale's signature near the bottom. Beneath the photo was a message. He said I would take the fall. I have more. Dorian stared at the screen. Mara read over his shoulder. Her eyes sharpened. That, she said, is fear becoming useful. Dorian did not answer. He looked out across the shop. At Warren, who had nearly lost another machine. At Lewis, who had nearly seen another man hurt. At Tom and Eddie, who had stayed in a place someone else was trying to turn into a graveyard of mistakes. At Rook, lying now near the office door, finally resting, though his ears still twitched at every sound. Dorian felt the old anger return. But this time, it did not rush ahead of him. It stood beside him, waiting for orders. He typed back to Sarah. Bring it to Mara. Not me, not alone. Then he set the phone down. Outside, Caleb Rusk's world was still polished, still powerful, still pretending clean hands meant clean work. Inside the workshop, the lights stayed on. And now, for the first time, the dark outside had left tracks. By dawn, Sarah Hale's evidence was no longer a promise on a phone. It sat on Mara Ellison's desk in a stack of scanned pages, labeled, copied, and sealed with the same grim care a surgeon might use while closing a wound that had been open too long. Sarah had not brought it to Dorian. He had told her not to. She had met Mara at the county library before sunrise, in a private study room with glass walls and fluorescent lights that made everyone look older than they were. Sarah arrived in the same beige wool coat she wore like armor, but the polish had started to crack. Her chestnut brown hair was pinned back too tightly, her pale face drawn at the mouth, her green eyes restless with the panic of someone who had finally discovered that betrayal had no permanent allies. Mara later described the meeting with her usual dry precision. She didn't confess out of goodness, the lawyer said, standing in Daniel Hale's office with the documents spread before her. She confessed because Caleb decided she was disposable. Dorian did not answer. He stood near the window, one hand resting on Rook's harness. The German Shepherd's cream-gray-black coat still carried the faint smell of oil and cold air from the previous night's search around the loading dock. Rook was tired. Dorian could feel it in the way the dog leaned subtly into his leg, though his amber eyes remained alert. Warren Pike stood across the desk, arms folded, his scarred hands tucked beneath his elbows. The old machinist looked at the documents as if they were another damaged part, ugly, but repairable if handled correctly. "What did she give you?" Warren asked. Mara adjusted her glasses, though she did not wear them often. She did it when she needed a moment to keep anger from becoming expression. Emails, payment records, a side agreement between one of Caleb's shell suppliers and Sarah. A draft letter designed to make Daniel appear responsible for approving altered materials. And this. She turned one page toward Dorian. It was a printed message from Caleb to Sarah. No poetry, no confession, just business language, clean and bloodless. Once Hale collapses, remaining assets can be acquired below lien value. Your cooperation ensures your share remains protected. Dorian read it once. Then again. The words did not shout. That made them worse. His father's ruin had not been built with screams. It had been built in careful sentences. Mara continued. It still has to be authenticated. But with the contract revisions, the wrong delivery, the compressor tampering, Sarah's statement, and Deputy Brannigan's report, there's enough to file for injunction, request discovery, and ask the court to freeze any transfer of disputed assets. Meaning? Warren asked. Meaning Caleb doesn't get to quietly swallow the workshop. For the first time all morning, Warren breathed out. Not relief. Something rougher. A man hearing that a door had not closed yet. Dorian looked toward the shop floor. Tom was already at the inspection table, moving slower than usual, but with stubborn care. Eddie had set out the calipers in a perfect row. Lewis sat beside the order board, writing the day's tasks in block letters. They had no idea yet what the papers meant. Or maybe they knew enough. Old men who had lived through loss rarely needed full explanations to recognize the sound of a fight turning. Mara gathered the documents. We file today. Dorian nodded. Do it. You understand this won't be clean. Caleb will fight. He'll call Daniel careless, Sarah unreliable, you emotional, the shop obsolete. Dorian's face did not change. He can call it whatever he wants. Mara looked at him. And what will you call it? Dorian looked down at Rook. The dog lifted his head, watching him with that solemn patience animals sometimes have, as though they carry no language because humans have already used too many words poorly. Dorian said, Work. The courthouse was smaller than Dorian expected. Not grand, not marble, just brick, old stairs, wet mats near the entrance, and the faint smell of paper, salt, and institutional coffee. Justice, it seemed, did not always wear robes like a god. Sometimes it sat beneath buzzing lights and asked for properly numbered exhibits. Caleb Rusk arrived before the hearing. He came in a charcoal suit, silver-gray hair combed back, expression controlled enough to insult everyone who had ever mistaken calm for innocence. Two attorneys followed him, both polished and expensive. One was a woman in her late 40s with sleek black hair, narrow glasses, and the cold efficiency of a person who charged by the minute, and wasted none of them. The other was a broad man with a red tie, and a smile too practiced to be friendly. Caleb saw Dorian near the hallway wall. For a moment, the old arrogance returned complete. You're learning the wrong lesson, Caleb said quietly as he passed. Dorian did not move. Rook stood at his side, harness firm, amber eyes fixed on Caleb. The dog did not growl. He did not bark. He only watched. Caleb glanced down. His jaw tightened. There were men who feared attack. Caleb seemed to fear being seen. Mara stepped between them before Dorian could answer. Mr. Rusk, she said, voice mild. Do keep talking in hallways. It saves us filing requests. Caleb's smile thinned and vanished. The hearing did not give Dorian the kind of justice stories promised. No one gasped. No judge slammed a gavel in righteous fury. There was argument, procedure, objection, response, documents passed forward, questions of authenticity, questions of timing, questions of harm. Mara did not perform. She built. Page by page, she showed the chain. Altered contract language, supplier ties, Sarah's side agreement, the wrong steel delivery, the tampered compressor line, the pattern of pressure placed on Daniel Hale before the old collapse, and revived against Dorian when the workshop began to recover. Sarah appeared by remote statement. Her face on the screen looked smaller than Dorian remembered. Without the doorway, without the coat, without the cold posture of control, she seemed like what she was. A woman who had tried to save herself by stepping onto another person's neck and had discovered the ground beneath her was also moving. She did not ask Dorian to forgive her. That was the only decent thing she did. When asked why she had cooperated with Caleb, she looked down for a long moment. Because I thought Daniel was going to lose everything anyway, she said, and I wanted to be on the side that survived. The courtroom went very quiet. Dorian felt the words enter him. Not as a wound this time. As proof. His father had not been weak because someone betrayed him. He had been human because it hurt. During recess, Dorian stepped outside into the courthouse courtyard. Snow had stopped, leaving the bare trees glazed with ice. Rook walked beside him, paws soundless on the wet stone path. The dog had been calm through the hearing, but now he moved toward a bench beneath a leafless maple, and stopped. Dorian followed. On the bench sat Warren Pike. The old man had not said he was coming. He wore his brown work coat instead of anything formal, oil stains still dark along one sleeve. His wool cap was pulled low over silver hair, and his weathered face looked uncomfortable in the clean world of legal consequence. "I hate courts," Warren said. Dorian sat beside him. "Me too." Warren looked ahead. Daniel did too. Dorian did not respond. Warren reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small metal object, dull with age. It was a brass nameplate. Hale Precision Works. The old sign from one of the first machines, worn at the corners, the letters scratched but readable. "He gave me this before the worst of it," Warren said. "Told me to keep it in case the name ever needed putting back somewhere." Dorian stared at it. The world seemed to narrow to that small piece of brass in Warren's palm. For years, he had imagined his father leaving nothing but debt, silence, and locked doors. But here was another kind of inheritance. Not money, not apology. A name kept safe by an old man who refused to throw it away. Rook pressed his muzzle gently against Dorian's knee. Dorian took the nameplate. His hand closed around it, and for one strange, brief moment, the cold courtyard felt like a forge. The court granted the temporary injunction by late afternoon. It was not victory. Mara made that clear immediately. "It freezes disputed transfers," she said as they walked out. "It opens discovery. It brings Caleb's supplier network under review. It does not mean anyone goes to prison tomorrow." "What does it mean for the shop?" Dorian asked. "It means you still have one." Caleb left without looking at him. That was the first time Dorian saw him look less powerful, not defeated, but reduced. A man whose polished world had been forced to let in weather. Over the next weeks, the investigation widened. Deputy Brannigan's report became part of the file. The supplier who had sent the wrong steel denied involvement until delivery records proved the truck was subcontracted through a company tied to Rusk Industrial. The compressor tampering could not be pinned cleanly on Caleb, but it no longer looked like coincidence. Sarah's cooperation earned her legal protection from immediate charges, but not escape. Her name remained attached to the documents, the payments, the quiet forwarding of internal files. Caleb's accounts were not destroyed. His company did not vanish overnight. Real life did not hand out punishments like thunderbolts. But contracts froze. Clients withdrew. His lenders demanded review. The clean glass building on County 9 began to look less like a castle and more like a place with too many windows. And the Hale workshop kept working. Not grandly, not triumphantly, just steadily. Rafe Milner's repair order was delivered late but correct. Then came another small order from a local plow service. Then a farmer needing custom brackets. Then a school maintenance department with old boiler components no newer shop wanted to touch. The old men became the shop's strength, not its weakness. Tom trained a widower named Glenn to sort stock by hand and eye. Eddie taught measurement to a retired bus mechanic whose fingers were thick but patient. Lewis built order boards simple enough for anyone to read, and strict enough that no job disappeared into someone's private panic. Warren became technical lead without ever accepting the title out loud. Dorian let him. That was the miracle, if there was one. Not that the shop survived, but that Dorian stopped needing survival to look like command. By spring, the building changed. The roof still leaked in one corner. The main lathe still complained in cold weather. The office still smelled faintly of old paper and burned coffee. But there were new work tables, a training schedule pinned to the wall, a handwritten notice near the entrance. Skill does not expire here. The first day of the senior apprenticeship program, 6 older workers arrived. Not charity cases, not ghosts, workers. One woman named Agnes Bell came with gray hair braided down her back and hands scarred from 40 years in textile mills. A quiet man with hearing aids brought his own toolbox wrapped in cloth. Another arrived with arthritis gloves and a stubborn refusal to be called retired. Dorian stood before them, uncomfortable with speeches. Warren saved him. "He's bad at talking," the old man said. "But he's learning." The room laughed. Even Dorian. Rook lay near the door, harness on, head high, watching the new arrivals as if approving each one by some ancient canine court. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, Dorian mounted the brass nameplate near the office door. He did it himself. 2 screws, a level, steady hands. Warren watched from the shop floor. Mara leaned against a workbench, arms crossed, pretending she had only stopped by for paperwork. Deputy Brannigan had dropped off a copy of an updated report and lingered long enough to see the plate go up. Rook sat directly beneath it. Dorian stepped back. Hail Precision Works. The letters were not new. That was the point. He thought of his father then. Not as weak, not as perfect. As a man who had been outplayed, overburdened, betrayed, and still tried to keep people employed when the world had already priced them as waste. Dorian had spent years believing strength meant not falling. Now he knew better. Strength was sometimes admitting the floor had cracked and asking other hands to help hold the roof. He rested one hand on Rook's head. The dog leaned into him. Outside, the last light of evening settled over the industrial road. The town did not look transformed. The snowbanks were dirty, the fences rusted. The world remained unfair in all its usual ways. But inside the workshop, machines turned with a slow, steady rhythm. Old hands taught older lessons to new ones. No one worked alone. And for the first time in years, the Hale name did not sound like something ruined. It sounded like something rebuilt. Here is the final message for the story. At the end of every broken road, there is sometimes a light we did not earn, a hand we did not expect, and a mercy we cannot fully explain. Dorian thought he had come home to bury a failure. Instead, God led him back to a place where truth had been waiting under dust, where old hands still had purpose, where a loyal dog heard danger before any man could name it, and where a father's love had survived even misunderstanding. Maybe that is what miracles often look like in real life. Not thunder from the sky, not a door opening all at once, but one small sign after another. A dog that refuses to move, a worker who still believes, a forgotten book under an old desk, a chance to do differently what the generation before could not finish. In everyday life, many people carry silent burdens. Some are trying to rebuild after loss. Some are caring for families no one sees. Some are still waiting for forgiveness or courage, or one more reason not to give up. If this story reminded you of someone who kept going when life gave them every reason to stop, share it with them. If it touched your heart, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your words may encourage someone else who needs to hear that their story is not over yet. And if you believe in stories about loyalty, second chances, faith, and the quiet miracles God places along our path, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, strengthen your heart, and guide you through every difficult season. Until next time, remember this. Sometimes the miracle is not that the storm disappears. Sometimes the miracle is that God sends someone to stand beside you until you are strong enough to rebuild.